the end of the day, you're building for people, and you have to really understand the people you're building for and what makes them unique and individual. In order to actually come up with good solutions, you really do need to do everything you can to understand the unique richness of the user base or the customer base that you're working for.
Why did I become an executive coach? I saw lots of great people fail to get ahead at work, while their much less talented peers blew right past them. That made me furious, but also curious. What were great people getting wrong? It came down to helping them re-examine what drove success, and then helping them make critical shifts, one hard truth at a time.
Feel like you're doing everything you were told, but you're not moving ahead at work nor having the impact you seek? Then welcome to 97% Effective with Michael Wenderoth, where we skip feel-good, happy talk and engage experts in pointed conversations about what it really takes to move the needle at work and your career. So if you feel stalled or frustrated, or seek that extra edge as you move to the next level, then look no further. This is the Hard Truths Playbook you never got.
Hi, I'm Michael Wenderoth, and you're listening to 97% Effective. Behavioral science, the science of understanding why we do what we do, and how we might harness those insights to influence people to achieve specific goals. Drawing from psychology, economics, neuroscience, and other disciplines, behavioral science has been hailed as producing simple interventions, nudges, or hacks that can dramatically impact results, ranging from increasing organ donor rates to 401k contributions, to getting people to stick to their exercise plans and even be better employees. But that's wildly overblown, argues my guest today, Jason Hreha, CEO of Persona, the leading executive assistant company. Jason is on a mission to share the truth about behavioral science. After all, he's a leading applied behavioral scientist, applied being the key word here. Educated and trained at Stanford, Jason cut his teeth on real business problems. He did that as co-founder and global head of behavioral sciences at Walmart after more than a decade starting and consulting Silicon Valley companies, helping them apply behavioral science to address hard problems in technology. I've invited Jason to cut through the most egregious behavioral science BS and reflect on what has helped him stand out in his field. Jason, welcome to 97% Effective.
Thanks for having me, Michael.
So Jason, you left Walmart a few years back to go start Persona. And when you did that, you really focused on getting the company on the ground. And so we didn't see as much of you on social media.
No.
There is a lot. You used to tweet a lot, and I see you're back to doing that. But what would be one interesting or important thing about you that we actually can't find out about you on the internet?
Yeah, in general, I would say that I'm a pretty open book. I write about kind of most of my thoughts, feelings, opinions online, but I would say that one thing that I haven't talked very much about was that for most of my life, I actually thought I would be an artist. So that was my calling ever since I was a little kid. I was an avid painter all throughout elementary, middle, and high school. And I always assumed I would go to art school, become a fine arts painter, go down that whole path, trying to get into galleries and sell my work. And so actually for a lot of my life, I wasn't that interested in science. I started getting interested in it maybe like later in elementary school, but for most of my life, I was most interested in creative pursuits and just really always imagined that that would be my life's work. And so it's still surprising to me that I went down the science and behavioral science in particular route.
Was there something in particular that flipped that switch that sent you down neuroscience and behavioral science?
Yeah, actually. So I think I've shared this story once before, but actually it would have been junior year of high school. I took a course. I went to an interesting high school where we actually got to choose our literature courses starting our junior year. And I chose this course on ancient Eastern thought. So we read a lot of Buddhist texts, a lot of texts from just different Eastern religions. And this was right around when there were all these fMRI studies being done on monks. And so there's this guy out of the University of Wisconsin who was doing fMRI brain scans on monks as they were meditating. and talking about neuroplasticity and kind of really interesting, brain scan differences between trained meditators and non-trained meditators. And it was when I encountered that material during the course that I just became obsessed. So I just became fascinated by neuroscience in particular. I was less interested in behavioral science as a whole. I was much more interested in just how does the brain work? What's going on up there? What's the chemistry involved? Like what's happening, like what are all these different brain regions? What are they responsible for? And so it was really in a literature course that kind of got me interested in the brain sciences. And at that point I was like, I have to study this stuff. Like this is what I have to think about going forward. I just became obsessed.
And you ended up at the epicenter there at Stanford and Silicon Valley, particularly in terms of applied behavioral science, looking at tech. In the introduction, I gave probably what was a long description of behavioral science. It's a fairly wide field. Was that a fair representation, or is there a clearer, simpler way of how we should think about what behavioral science is?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, behavioral science and applied behavioral science, I kind of see them as two different things. I spend most of my time thinking about applied behavioral science, right? Like, how do we take behavioral science findings and apply them to problems that, important problems that we're facing, in the real world. And so I always like to think about and talk about applied behavioral science as really the study and practice of how to get people to change their behavior, to get people to behave differently.
Getting people to behave differently, and I guess that's what everyone is seeking in some fashion, from businesses to governments to ourselves, in some of those examples I gave. And you have really kind of called out in a lot of your posts and a post recently how the field has gotten overblown. So if you were to say kind of what is probably the biggest BS that everyone in the field ought to be aware of, what would you single out?
There's this whole kind of strain of thought that was very influential, I'd say, in the online world and in the self-help world years ago, around this whole idea of like life hacks, or just small changes that lead to dramatic life changes. And I would say that way of thinking has, I think, really infected the behavioral sciences. So there's all this talk about nudging and nudges. And, if you make this small change to your marketing, or if you make this small change to your program, or if you make this small change to your product, you're going to get this huge result in terms of people behaving way differently. In my career, I've rarely, if ever, seen small changes really lead to massive behavioral results. In general, if people aren't performing a certain way with your app or your program or with whatever you're doing, in general, you need to rethink it completely and make huge changes. I've very rarely seen small changes lead to big results. And, actually, this has really been, I've been saying this since maybe 2012 or 13, but the research, I was just basing this off of what I was seeing with the work that I was doing with startups and tech companies.
Right.
And I would say that in the last, 2, 3, 4 years, the research has kind of caught up to what I've been saying all along. And we just had this big piece that came out of UC Berkeley, I believe it was last year, where they got 126 randomized controlled trials from a nudge unit here in the United States, doing these sorts of small behavior change interventions. And what they found was that the average impact on the outcome variables that they were trying to change was 1.4%. Whereas the academic literature they're basing these changes on predicted, and I believe it was an 8.7% absolute change in the outcome variables. So you had the actual real-world interventions were 1/6 as powerful as the literature promised. And so I think that's, for example, for me, that is kind of the nail in the coffin around this whole perspective of, small changes are amazing and you can get big results. And I think that's the most overblown thing.
So if it sounds too good to be true, there is some little magical thing that you can insert and it's going to prove dramatic results. That is the sign to beware of if you're out there kind of consuming behavioral science.
Early in my career, when I first got started with all this stuff, I was kind of naive. I believed all the literature I read. I believed, kind of the papers I would read. And I just assumed that these effects, these sometimes very large effects that I'd read about, would kind of play out in the real world. And I just saw time and time again that they don't.
And I heard another piece that you mentioned, and this clearly sounds like you have been spending a lot of time, as an executive or designing products. And that was, I'll use the kind of very crude version here, which is, it sounds like you cannot buff a turd. So if you've got like a piece of crap to begin with, no intervention, layering, useful pieces of behavioral science even on it are going to make much of a difference. Is that another piece I heard?
Yeah, Michael, I really would agree with that. I think that behavioral scientists are often brought in after the fact to try and save just a bad product or a bad initiative. Behavioral science cannot cover up for just a poorly designed, poorly created product. At the end of the day, it can inform the strategy and the design of the product from the ground up, and I think it probably should. That's where I think behavioral science is most useful, is when it's kind of really incorporated into the strategy, the design, the very kind of construction of the product from the ground up. And sometimes it can be used after the fact, after a product's been developed, to come in and, make some tweaks and kind of improve things, optimize things. But if you've built something bad, it's never going to save the day.
Right. And let's dive into that, because we've addressed how it's overblown. Clearly, you still believe in a lot of the applications and where it can work, and you started to talk about where it's most useful. I'd love to hear more about, you've been writing most recently how behavioral science, and you've been working for many years, particularly in your consulting, where behavioral science can help with innovation. And can you talk about that in terms of how it does enhance innovation, or where we can practically use it?
Yeah, so it's my belief, and I've kind of come to this conclusion, over many years, that really behavioral science should be at the table from the very beginning stages of like the very beginning stages of like product creation or product strategy. So every business problem at the end of the day is a behavior problem, right? McDonald's, right? All of their business problems are behavior problems, right? People aren't coming in enough. People aren't, coming in for lunch. People aren't purchasing enough. People don't have a McDonald's habit. Every Facebook, every Meta problem is a behavior problem. Oh, people aren't engaged enough. They're not sending enough messages. They're not posting enough. So I see that basically every single business problem is a behavior problem. And so you should probably have somebody who spends a lot of time thinking about behavior at the table, sitting with you as you're coming up with your business strategy to solve whatever business issue it is that you're trying to solve.
Yeah. What does that look like? Clearly at Persona, right? You are an applied behavioral scientist. And
Sure.
so you're bringing that into your meetings. You're the guy who does that. Where you've seen, perhaps at Walmart or other companies you've consulted, like what is the top companies who are, applying behavioral science? Do they have a dedicated person? Is it educating the whole marketing team around some of the basic principles? What does that kind of look like, best practices?
To be honest, like I don't think that this is done that often in the real world. In general, applied behavioral science is either either incorporated into companies in a research capacity or in this optimization nudging capacity. I see very few behavioral science people kind of getting involved in product creation and service creation from like the very beginning stages. It just really doesn't happen, right? If you that's just not the structure of the field as it is today. But that's really what I've been calling for a long time, and where I think it's most useful. And that's why I loved working with startups, is because when you're working with a startup, you don't have all these layers of hierarchy. You don't have 50 or 100 stakeholders or whatever involved in every project. It's you, the founding team, and maybe a couple of other people, right? Sitting together at a table and figuring out what to do next, right? There's less red tape. It's possible to make bigger changes. It's possible for you as a behavioral scientist to get involved in kind of all of the decisions and the strategy. And so I think that in the startup world is really the only place where you have this kind of behavioral strategic perspective being incorporated into, like, in the right way, into like product design.
Yeah. And at Persona, which you've built from the ground up and turned it into a leading recruiter of executive assistants, can you give us like something tangible that where the behavioral science is really driven, whether it's the product or how you've gone to market? Love to hear how you've applied it here as in your latest creation.
I think the key thing that I've brought to Persona is like what I would call it, like the behavioral scientific mindset, which is, I've been obsessed with kind of learning everything I can about people, and kind of how we think and how we behave for a long time. And I've just brought that obsession to Persona. And I've just, every day, every week, I'm always asking, like, okay, is there a new or a better way of like interviewing people? Is there a new or a better way of kind of understanding, how creative a person is? Is there a newer or a better way of understanding, if two individuals, like a client and an applicant, will get along really well? How can I figure these things out? From the resume, is there anything more that I can kind of glean based on their kind of experience? Can I ask for different information with the resume in order to give me kind of a fuller picture? So it's just this constant process of like asking myself, like every day and every week, how can we make this better? How can I better predict, who's going to be a good match or a good fit? And I see everything in these matching terms. I know that like a lot of people in the recruiting world talk about it in terms of like, oh, like we recruit the best engineers or whatever it may be. Well, what does the best engineer mean? I mean, this idea of the best, of like, oh, there's a number one person, then there's a number two person, then there's a number three person. It's kind of silly, right? Because if you're a Python engineer and your company, codes in a different language, then okay, what does it mean then for somebody to be the best engineer, right? It's like there are different languages, there are different skill sets. At the end of the day, it's about matching. It's about matching people to the right opportunities for them. And so at Persona, like we're just constantly trying to figure out, like, optimize this matching problem and figure out how do we best match individuals based on their individual strengths, experiences, skills, talents, etc.
You've been listening to 97% Effective with your host, Executive Coach Michael Winderoth. If this interview is making you think, make sure to share it with a friend. Now, back to our interview.
And that matching, we probably don't have time to go into the methodology, which would be interesting, I think, a total separate podcast. But just off the bat, is that methodology, are there people who are involved with that, or is it very much get baked into algorithms and you're constantly feeding new parameters in there?
I think that one of the most interesting things for me kind of doing Persona over the years has been that I've just gained a much greater appreciation for recruiters and just for the importance of just, what would be considered a non-sexy, non-technical tool, which is just interviewing, right? And that looking at a resume, using a resume to come up with like questions or things that you want to talk about, and then just bringing empathy and just curiosity with you into an interview. If you just have skilled interviewers that have that great empathy, that are able to really just kind of dig deep in their conversations, I mean, that just nothing's better than that. I think a lot of startups go through this process of they go out into the world saying, okay, the world is the way people are doing things today is suboptimal and doesn't make sense. And they go out trying to kind of revolutionize things or change things. And then a lot of these companies, when they evolve and grow and gain experience, they look a lot like the incumbent industry or the incumbent players than they ever expected to, right? I think that that's definitely been the case with us. It's like, I think I've really come to appreciate recruiting and just, some of these more, of course, these time-tested traditional practices.
Yeah, so we've been talking about behavioral science and what it brings to innovation, as well as how you're using it If we shift gears a little bit to changing habits, which is a topic we brought back at the beginning. It's an area near and dear to me. As an executive coach working with a lot of individuals, we are trying to sometimes help them build or change habits. From your perspective, also having spent many years in the field, what is the key to changing or developing habits? What has been overblown, perhaps, also?
Something that I've been struggling with over the last couple of years has been this question around, is it even possible to form habits for challenging, effortful things? So, a habit, just technically is supposed to be this kind of subconscious, automatic kind of, behavior, right? That is just cued by the environment, where it's like, waking up, mindlessly walking downstairs and, filling up, pushing the coffee button, having the coffee created, and before you know it, there's a mug of hot coffee in your hand. That's an easy behavior, but most people don't want to form these simple, easy behaviors as habits. People don't really have trouble with simple, easy behaviors. What people want to do with habit formation is they want to automate uncomfortable things that they don't like, that they think would be good for them, right? So
Right,
people want
exactly.
to have the writing everyday habit, or the running every day or working out every day habit. But all those things, require actually quite a bit of conscious effort and willpower to kind of push through. So it's I don't like running. So for me to go running, it would, it's an uncomfortable process. I would have to use willpower to get through it. I'd have to push through it. It's effortful. Is that something I can really just kind of do subconsciously or automatically? I don't think so. These sorts of things that everybody wants to build a habit around, technically, I don't know if it's possible for these things to be truly habitual. You can create a routine around them. Somebody on LinkedIn the other day, I wrote an article that kind of talked about this, and another behavioral scientist jumped in and said, I think that's an example of the difference between a habit and a routine. A routine is something that's more conscious, that you do frequently or every day, but it's not a habit. It's not this automatic, thing that your body just naturally emanates or naturally does, with no prompting and no effort. So for me, this is the big question about habit formation is is the main use case that everybody is trying to get from habits, is a habit even the right tool? And this kind of goes to the quote unquote habit approach that I've used for many years, which is all about picking the right behavior for your goals.
Yeah, say more about that.
Yeah. So what I mean by that is, if you're every goal has, there are 1,000 paths to every goal. If we start with the goal first, what is my goal? And then we basically come up with a huge list of potential behaviors for that goal. One of those behaviors, one of those paths to achieving that outcome or that goal, is going to be much more in line with my skills, my context, my situation, my likes, my dislikes than the other behaviors. And so instead of starting with the behavior first and trying to do all these hacks and little tweaks in order to make that behavior happen, instead, let's zoom out a little bit, start with the goal. What do I actually want to achieve? And then think of all the different ways we can achieve that goal. And then let's pick the behavior that actually would be easiest for you and that you would enjoy the most.
And is this, Jason, is it like playing to your strengths in a way?
Exactly.
Or is that the wrong way to be thinking about it?
It's playing to your strengths because, as I mentioned before, if something's really challenging, if something actually is going to require a ton of effort from you and be really hard, you're probably not going to gain any automaticity, right? It's really never probably going to become even remotely habitual. So you have to play to your strengths, but you also want to find something that you enjoy. You want to find something that's fun for you. That's how I like to describe it. Pick fun behaviors that are not too hard for you, that lead to the goals that you desire. And at the end of the day, that's your best chance of actually really forming something resembling a habit that will lead you to the outcomes that you desire.
So breaking those things down, so you're making kind of this easier for you.
Mm-hmm.
Individuals may be different here. So I'm hearing that is not so much a one size all. Here's the routine that everyone has to, put the stuff out. Alarm goes off at a certain time. Here, think about how you're a little bit programmed and to build the routine versus thinking about a routine instead of habit that way.
Yeah. And, that's like really been my whole kind of a drum I've been beating for a long time, is that, psychology and the behavioral sciences, I think, have really been obsessed for a long time with, I guess you could call them like human universals, or just kind of like, hey, cool, everybody's loss averse. Everybody's, here's this thing called priming that affects everyone, or like, everybody, here's 6 principles of persuasion, right? There's scarcity, authority, etc. And, just use these. And like, these are like these like hacks or triggers that will basically affect, the implication with all these studies is that they'll affect everybody, like maybe not equally, but like, these are like universal persuaders or universal kind of influencers for people in general. But I think, the truth of the matter is that we all are very unique. We all have very different psychologies. Like somebody who, like, for example, I have a friend who's very anxious. He's much more sensitive to fear cues, like things like he's always looking out for danger in his environment, right? He's, if he feels a sensation in his arm, he's worried that, maybe he's, has a tumor, or that there's a health issue there, right? So he has like what I'd consider hypochondria. The things that would kind of move him to action, the things that do move him to action in his own life, are very different than the things that move me to action, right?
Right.
And so I think that when it comes to changing habits in our own lives, or in the lives of other people that we care about, it's the key thing is just really personalizing things and understanding them, understanding each person as an individual.
Jason, before we kind of conclude, we've talked a lot about behavioral sciences and how you've seen it applied it in different scenarios. To shift this a little and get personal, part of the podcast here is around navigating and work and careers, and you've really had a spectacular career, and you moved a couple years back from the startup world, Silicon Valley, over to the giant, to Walmart, which is a very different environment if we're talking about having to kind of potentially shift some of your routines. What made you successful there if you had to break down some of the things moving into a large company and bringing in a very new idea into a large organization?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say that if I think about it, I really think that like there were like really 2 things that made me successful there. Number one was that I had a unique skill set, right? Like I wasn't really replaceable, where I was one of 2 people at the company who had a deep background in applied behavioral science. So if anybody at Walmart's a massive organization, if anybody at the company was interested in an applied behavior question, it's like, who do you go to? It's you go to me or the other person who I co-founded the Walmart group with. So it's like there were 2 of us in the entire company, and you had to talk to one of us if you're interested in this stuff. And a lot of people, of course, are interested in this stuff just because, as I mentioned before, everybody in business is in the business of changing behavior or trying to influence behavior. And so, a lot of people at the company had behavioral questions or wanted to know, get insight into these things. And basically it's like, I'm one of the only, restaurants in town serving that dish, right?
Right.
So that really helped me. So I think having a unique skill set or a unique kind of niche or body of knowledge just was critical for me.
Right.
The other thing was our group, the behavioral science group, was we had champions, and in particular, we had one champion who was like an EVP, and he supported us and was very just very enthusiastic about our work, about the way that we thought about our research, and he just opened every door for us.
Mm-hmm.
So just really, I'd say that the other thing that really made our group successful was just having support from the top. Right, we had one of the 10 most influential people in the entire company, right, on our side and championing us. So I would say that at Walmart, it was really I'd say that I could attribute a lot of our success just in the organization to having just really enthusiastic, wonderful supporters. One supporter in particular who was an EVP.
Yeah.
And then also just we just had a very unique expertise and body of knowledge that people really wanted. So.
Yeah. And having that champion, was that already there, or was that something you had to cultivate?
It was already there.
Cultivate in your interview, probably to even build the unit. There had to be some
so
behind it.
The whole group existed basically because this individual was interested in this area and wanted to basically support a group at the company that would do this. So I would say that in knowing what I know now, it's like I don't think I would ever join a large company without, one of the top, 10 people in the entire company kind of blessing me and supporting me on the way in.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's at a large company, if you want to do important, impactful work, I think you have to have an ally who's, at the highest levels of the company who can really support you.
Yeah, important insights. Jason, our time here is coming to an end. Is there an important question? I know you've been talking a lot about persona. You've been talking for many years about applied behavioral sciences, but anything that I haven't asked or is not being asked of you these days that you think is particularly important you just want to address here at the end?
The main thing to reiterate is that I think that just be skeptical of what you hear. Don't believe kind of all the behavioral science hype. Small changes generally don't lead to large results. And I would say that, I think that the big thing that the field has really kind of missed is just like, at the end of the day, you're building for people, and you have to really understand the people you're building for and what makes them unique and individual. And you have to bring this sense of, I talked about it in the context of interviewing earlier, about kind of bringing in curiosity and empathy into kind of interviewing individuals and really understanding them. But the same thing goes to doing great applied behavioral science work, right? Like when I was at Walmart, I spent a lot of time in the stores, talking with customers, talking with store associates, kind of really doing everything I could to understand the people that we were building for. I think that, kind of the field has missed out on that a bit. But in order to actually come up with good solutions, you really do need to do everything you can to understand the unique richness of the user base or the customer base that you're working for. And you need to, go and talk to people and understand everything you can and really understand them as people, not as, test subjects. So,
yeah. So talking to people, clearly you have a lot of work that you publish on your website to kind of become familiar with behavioral science and what is useful in terms of being applied. Are there other ways that people can see your work or reach out to you?
Yeah. So, I have a website. It's thebehavioralscientist.com.
Mm-hmm.
You can go there. I have a contact form on the page, so you can email me through there, ask me any questions that you have. I write a newsletter kind of intermittently on LinkedIn and also through my own newsletter, which you can sign up for at thebehavioralscientist.com. But yeah, those are the main ways that you can kind of reach me if you have further questions or just want to talk about anything related to applied behavioral science.
Awesome. Jason Hreha, CEO of Persona. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Great. Thanks, Michael.
Thanks for listening to 97% Effective, where we skip happy talk and help you break through and ascend one hard truth at a time. Help others discover this show. Leave a review and rating wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if you like what you heard, you can get free resources, including the first chapters of Michael's book, Get Promoted, on his website, www.changwenderoth.com. That's www.changwenderoth.com.